If mercy was a crime, then Emily Harper was already guilty before the moon reached the trees. The first drop of red on the snow should have made her run. Everyone in Frostpine knew what blood meant after dark. Predators, rogues, things that slipped through the northern woods when the wind sounded too much like whispering. But Emily stood frozen beside the half-frozen creek, her worn boots sinking into 6 inches of powder, her breath trembling in pale clouds before her face. Another drop stained the white ground ahead of her. Then another, a trail leading beneath the black pines. She tightened her fingers around the small basket of winter herbs hooked over her arm and listened. At first, there was only the hush of falling snow, the soft crackle of ice shifting along the creek, the distant call of an owl hidden somewhere in the branches. Then came the sound again. Low, broken, not a howl, not quite a growl, more like something powerful trying not to be heard while pain dragged it closer to silence. Emily's heart pressed hard against her ribs. She should have turned back. She should have gone straight to the patrol house, knocked on the iron door, and told them something wounded had crossed into pack land. That was the law. Every child in Frostpine learned it before they learned to shift. Strange wolves were threats. Cursed wolves were to be reported. Anything marked by shadow belonged to the royal hunters. But Emily had spent her whole life being judged by rules made by people who never once looked closely enough to see the truth. So she stepped forward. The trees swallowed her quickly, their branches heavy with snow, their trunks rising like dark pillars around her. The trail led nearly half a mile from the creek, down into a hollow where moonlight poured through the canopy in silver pieces. That was where she found him. A wolf lay against the roots of an ancient pine, larger than any wolf she had ever seen. His body curled protectively despite the tremor running through him. His fur should have been white, maybe silver in the moonlight, but it was streaked with red and dusted with frost. Dark lines moved faintly beneath his coat, thin as cracks in black glass, pulsing and fading as if some old curse were breathing under his skin. Emily stopped so suddenly her basket slipped from her hand and spilled herbs across the snow. The wolf's eyes opened. Silver. Not gray, not blue, but true silver, sharp and cold and impossibly aware. For one breath, the forest seemed to vanish. Emily forgot the cold. She forgot the law. She forgot that she was only an Omega girl from the edge of the pack, the one people passed without greeting, the one healers mocked for having hands too gentle to matter. The wolf stared at her as if he knew every name the world had used to make her small. Then his massive head lowered to the snow, and the sound that left him was not a warning. It was exhaustion. Emily swallowed, fear and pity twisting together inside her chest. "I'm not going to hurt you," she whispered, though her voice shook badly enough to betray her. The wolf's ears flicked at the sound, but he did not bare his teeth. Slowly, carefully, she knelt several feet away and reached for the scattered herbs with fingers gone numb from the cold. The wound along his side was deep enough to frighten her, but not beyond help. At least, not if she worked fast. Not if the shadow marks were only fever. Not if the patrol stayed far from this hollow until dawn. She looked back toward the direction of Frostpine, toward warm windows and locked doors, and people who would call her foolish before they called her brave. Then she looked at the wolf again. Snow gathered along his lashes. His breath came unevenly, fading white against the dark roots. Emily felt something inside her answer, quiet but certain, older than fear. She took one step closer, then another. "You picked the wrong girl to find you," she said softly, tears burning behind her eyes as she pulled off her cloak and spread it over the snow beside him. "I don't know how to walk away from something hurting." The wolf washed her hands as she reached for him, and when her palm finally touched his blood-warmed fur, a faint silver light flickered beneath her skin. The silver light vanished almost as quickly as it appeared, leaving Emily staring at her own hand as if it belonged to someone else. The wolf had gone still beneath her touch, not from fear, but from a strange, careful trust that made her throat tighten. She had seen that look before in fevered children and wounded barn cats, in anything small enough to know the world could be unkind. But there was nothing small about this creature. Even lying on his side, he was enormous, his shoulders broader than the doorway of her cabin, his paws larger than both her hands spread wide. Still, when Emily reached for the clean cloth folded inside her basket, he did not move away. "Easy," she whispered. "I know it hurts." Her voice trembled less now. Fear had a way of shrinking once there was work to do. She melted snow in a small tin cup over a travel flame, warmed the water between her palms, then began to clean the worst of the wound with slow, careful strokes. The dark markings under his fur shivered whenever the cloth passed near them, like shadows recoiling from candlelight. Emily tried not to think about what that meant. She tried not to think about the royal decree nailed to every post in Frostpine Village, the one ordering all citizens to report signs of cursed magic. She focused instead on breath, pressure, warmth. Her mother had taught her that before the pact decided Omega, healing was not worth the room it took up in a sick house. A healer did not begin with power. A healer began by staying. The memory struck sharper than the cold. Emily saw herself at 17, standing outside the Frostpine Infirmary with a basket of clean bandages pressed to her chest while the senior healer barred the door. Inside, a little boy she had helped through a dangerous fever slept safely for the first time in days. Emily had sat beside him all night, cooling his forehead, whispering stories until his breathing steadied. By morning, the official healers claimed their tonic had saved him. Emily did not argue. She only smiled with relief because the child lived. But by noon, people were whispering that an Omega had overstepped. By sunset, she was forbidden from touching patients without permission. Mason Reed had laughed loudest that day. The Beta's son had leaned against the infirmary steps and said, "Gentle hands do not make a healer, Emily. They just make you useful for cleaning up after one." Since then, she had treated sprained ankles in secret, soothed headaches behind closed doors, and left jars of salve on porches without signing her name. No one wanted her gift in the open. They only wanted it when no one was watching. A soft huff pulled her back to the hollow. The wolf's silver eyes were fixed on her face. Somehow, impossibly, he seemed to understand the weight of the memory. Emily lowered her gaze and tied the cloth around his side, firm enough to hold, gentle enough not to steal his breath. "Do not look at me like that," she murmured. "I am not sad. I am practical." The lie barely survived the air between them. The wolf blinked once, slow and solemn. Emily gave a breathless little laugh, the kind that came close to breaking. Fine, maybe a little sad. Snow slipped from the pine branches above them. Far away, a patrol horn sounded once from the ridge, low and distant. Emily's body went cold. The wolf heard it too. His head lifted, and the dark lines beneath his fur pulsed again, deeper this time, as if answering a call neither of them wanted to hear. Emily looked toward the village, then back at him. Dawn was still hours away. The patrols would sweep the creek first, then the lower woods. If they found him here, mercy would not matter. The law would speak before truth ever had a chance. Emily gathered her herbs with quick, shaking hands and tucked them into her basket. "I have a cabin," she whispered. "It is small, and the roof complains when the wind gets mean, but it is warmer than this." The wolf tried to rise and failed, his breath catching as his legs shook under him. Emily moved beside him without thinking, pressing her shoulder against his chest though he outweighed her many times over. "Come on," she said softly. "One step, then another. That is all survival ever is." For a moment, the great wolf looked down at her, silver eyes reflecting the moon through the trees. Then, with a strength that felt more like will than body, he leaned into her and took the first step toward the edge of the forest. By the time Emily reached the edge of Frostpine Village, her arms were shaking so badly she could barely feel her fingers. The wolf moved beside her like a shadow, trying to remember its own strength. Each step silent despite his size, each breath controlled with a discipline that made him seem less like an animal and more like a wounded soldier refusing to fall. Twice, Emily thought he would collapse before they reached her cabin. Twice, he steadied himself before she could speak, lowering his great head as if embarrassment meant something to him. "Almost there," she whispered, though the words were more prayer than promise. Her cabin waited beneath a leaning cedar at the farthest edge of packland, where the trees grew close enough to hide the roof from the main road. It was small, built from old pine and stubborn hope, with one crooked chimney, one narrow porch, and windows that caught the moon like dull glass. Most wolves called it the Mercy Shack because that was where unwanted things ended up: broken tools, stray animals, and Emily Harper. She had stopped minding the name after a while. Mercy was not the insult they thought it was. She eased the door open and guided the wolf inside, wincing as his shoulder brushed the frame. Warmth greeted them, thin but real. A low fire still glowed in the hearth, and dried herbs hung from the rafters in careful bundles. Sage, yarrow, mint, lavender, and frostroot tied with blue thread. The wolf paused in the doorway, his silver eyes moving across the room with startling attention. He noticed everything. The extra blankets folded beside the chair, the basin of clean water, the shelf of handmade remedies, the little wooden carving of a moon above the mantel, worn smooth from years of Emily touching it before sleep. For one strange second, she felt as though a king had stepped into her poverty and found it worth studying. Then the thought embarrassed her, and she looked away. "Do not judge the mess," she said softly. "I was not expecting company, especially not company with paws the size of dinner plates." The wolf gave a faint breath through his nose. It almost sounded like amusement. Emily froze, then narrowed her eyes at him. "You understood that." He looked away too quickly. Her heart gave a nervous little jump. Stories about cursed wolves had filled Frostpine all week, passed from mouth to mouth with the same excitement people used for storms and scandals. King Adrian Blackwood had vanished after traveling through the northern pass. Some said rebels had taken him. Some said the ancient curse in his blood had finally awakened. Others claimed he had shifted into a white wolf marked by living shadow, and that anyone who sheltered him would bring ruin on the realm. Lord Victor Hale, the king's own uncle, had sent riders across the territories with a warning sealed in black wax: report the cursed beast or share its fate. Emily had heard the decree read aloud in the village square that morning while Mason Reed smirked beside the notice post. The words had sounded official, cold, and final. But no decree had mentioned silver eyes that watched with human understanding. No decree had mentioned a creature who held back pain rather than frighten the girl trying to help him. Emily shut the door and dropped the latch. The sound seemed too loud in the tiny room. "I know what they say you are," she whispered. The wolf stood near the hearth, firelight moving over his frost-dusted fur. The dark lines beneath his coat pulsed once, then dimmed. "But I also know what I saw." She pointed to the braided rug by the fire. "Lie down before you fall down." To her astonishment, he obeyed. Slowly, carefully, he lowered himself onto the rug, his massive body curling around the warmth. Emily knelt beside him with fresh cloth, boiled water, and a jar of salve she had made from pine resin and wintergreen. As she worked, the room filled with quiet sounds: the crackle of wood, the whisper of snow against the shutters, the uneven rhythm of his breathing easing under her hands. The silver light flickered again beneath her palms, softer this time, spreading like moonlight under skin. Emily felt the pull of it deep in her chest, not painful, but costly, as if some hidden well inside her were opening drop by drop. The shadow marks drew back from her touch. The wolf watched her, silent and still. "You are not just cursed," she murmured before she could stop herself. "You are trapped." His eyes closed, and for the first time, the great creature let his head rest fully against the floor, as though someone had finally spoken the truth. Morning came without mercy, pale and cold behind the shutters, turning the frost on Emily's window into thin white veins. She had not slept. She had spent the last hours beside the hearth, changing cloths, warming water, and pretending not to notice every time the wolf's breathing faltered and found its rhythm again beneath her hands. The silver light had appeared twice more, each time softer, each time leaving her limbs heavier afterward, as if she had carried buckets of water up a hill in deep snow. Still, when the wolf's fever eased and the dark lines beneath his fur faded to faint threads, Emily felt something close to hope settle in the room. It frightened her more than fear did. Hope made people careless. Hope made lonely girls believe they could save things the world had already condemned. She rose quietly and crossed to the shelf for more frostroot. But the moment her hand reached the jar, the wolf lifted his head. His silver eyes followed her, alert and steady. "I am only getting herbs," she whispered. "You do not have to guard me from my own kitchen." His ears shifted forward. Emily paused, studying him in the dim gold of the dying fire. "That is what you are doing, is it not? Guarding." The wolf looked away, but not before she saw the answer in him. The smallness of her cabin made his presence impossible to ignore. He filled the room with winter and silence, with restrained power wrapped in exhaustion. Yet he had not snapped when pain took him. He had not growled when she leaned close. When she stumbled from weariness near dawn, his body had shifted just enough to keep her from falling against the hot edge of the hearth. No cursed monster would do that. Emily took down the jar and returned to his side. People are afraid of what they do not understand, she said, spreading salve over a clean cloth. Around here, that means they are afraid a lot. Outside, Frostpine Village began to wake. A rooster called from the lower farms. Wagon wheels creaked on the packed snow road. Somewhere far off, a bell rang 3 times from the watchtower, calling patrols to morning orders. The wolf went utterly still. Emily felt it before she heard it. The change in the air, the sudden pressure of danger moving closer. Then came voices beyond the trees. Men speaking low, boots crushing snow, a horse snorting in the cold. Emily's hand tightened around the cloth. Her cabin sat far from the main road, but not far enough if someone had followed the trail. She rushed to the window and lifted the curtain by less than an inch. 3 riders moved between the pines, black cloaks marked with Lord Victor Hale's silver pin. Royal searchers, not village patrol. Worse, one of them leaned from his saddle, studying the ground where snow had half covered the faint drag marks leading from the woods. Emily's breath caught. Behind her, the wolf rose too quickly. His legs shook, but his eyes were clear now, bright as moonlit steel. No, Emily whispered, turning back fast. You cannot go out there. You can barely stand. He took 1 step toward the door anyway. Proud, stubborn, half-healed, and still ready to face the world alone. Something in Emily broke open at the sight. She moved in front of him, palms raised, not because she could stop him by strength, but because she needed him to see her. Listen to me, she said, her voice low but fierce. Whoever you were before last night, whatever they are hunting, right now you are under my roof. And under my roof, nobody gets thrown back into the cold just because powerful men are afraid. The wolf stared down at her, and the room seemed to hold its breath. For a heartbeat, Emily thought he would ignore her. Then his head lowered, slowly, until his brow nearly touched hers. Not a bow, not submission, something gentler. Trust. A hard knock struck the door. Emily flinched, but she did not move away from him. Another knock followed, sharper this time. Opened by order of Lord Hale. A man called from outside. Emily looked at the wolf, then at the old storage room behind the hanging quilts. It was barely large enough for firewood, certainly not for a creature his size, but the back wall had a low cellar hatch beneath the floorboards. She pointed. Quietly, she breathed. Please. The wolf hesitated only once before slipping behind the quilts with impossible silence. Emily wiped her hands on her apron, forced her breathing steady, and opened the door just wide enough to let the cold in. The rider on the porch looked past her before he looked at her face. Emily Harper, he said, as if her name tasted unimportant. We are searching every home on the edge of Frostpine. Emily lowered her eyes, the way Omegas were expected to do. But her hand remained firm on the door. Then you may search the homes, she said softly. This is a healing cabin. His gaze sharpened. Then you should have nothing to hide. Behind her, beneath the floor, the faintest pulse of silver light warmed the boards under her feet. The rider stepped inside without waiting for permission, bringing the smell of iron-cold air and wet leather into Emily's small cabin. 2 more men remained on the porch, their shadows stretching across the threshold while the first swept his gaze over every corner, as if poverty itself were suspicious. Emily kept her shoulders rounded, her chin slightly lowered, the posture Frostpine had trained into her since childhood. Small, quiet, harmless. It was easier for powerful men to overlook a girl when she looked exactly how they expected an Omega to look. You live alone? The rider asked. Yes. No family. None nearby. His eyes moved to the hearth, the basin, the damp cloths folded too neatly beside the fire. Emily felt his attention catch there. Her pulse tapped hard beneath her collarbone, but her face stayed calm. In the storage room, beneath the floorboards, the wolf made no sound. Still, she could feel him somehow, not through hearing, not through scent, but through that strange silver warmth under her feet, steadying her like a hand pressed gently against the other side of the world. The rider picked up one of the cloths with 2 fingers. A faint stain marked the edge, washed nearly clean, but not enough. Busy morning for a band healer, he said. Emily folded her hands in front of her apron. Frostbite travels faster than permission in this weather. His mouth tightened. Careful. The word was soft, but it carried the weight of rank. Emily lowered her eyes again, not in surrender this time, but to hide the anger burning there. He crossed to her shelves, opening jars, smelling salves, turning over bundles of herbs. Lavender, pine resin, wintergreen, yarrow. When he reached the frost root, his hand paused. Royal searchers use this for field wounds, he said. Why would an edge girl have it? Emily's breath slowed. She had gathered it herself in the upper ravine, nearly slipping twice on the ice. But truth had to be shaped carefully around men who wanted guilt more than answers. Because royal searchers leave plenty behind when they decide a village is not worth cleaning up after. One of the men on the porch gave a low laugh before quickly silencing himself. The rider looked back at her, irritated now, and that was dangerous. Irritated men looked closer. He moved toward the hanging quilts that covered the storage room. Emily's stomach dropped. Each step sounded louder than the last. Beneath the floor, the silver warmth flared, and for one terrifying moment, she thought the wolf would rise. She shifted before she could think, stepping between the rider and the quilt. There is dried meat in there, she said quickly. If your horse is hungry, I can spare some. His eyes narrowed. Move. Emily did not. Her hands trembled, so she clasped them tighter. Please. That room is not safe. The floor has been weak since the last thaw. It was not entirely a lie. The back corner did sag. The cellar hatch was old. A large wolf beneath it was a secret the house had never been built to hold. The rider stared at her long enough for the fire to crackle twice. Then a horn sounded from the ridge, sharp and urgent. All three men turned toward it. A voice called from outside, distant but clear. Tracks near the creek. Heading east. The rider cursed under his breath, then pointed at Emily. If Lord Hale learns you lied, no one in Frostpine will protect you. Emily looked at him then, really looked, and the truth came out quieter than fear. No one in Frostpine ever has. Something flickered across his face, not pity, not quite shame, but close enough to make him step back. He dropped the cloth onto the table and left with a sweep of his cloak. Emily waited until the hoofbeats faded into the woods before she shut the door and slid the latch into place. Only then did her knees weaken. She caught the edge of the table, breathing hard, every sound in the cabin suddenly too clear. The quilt moved behind her. The wolf emerged slowly, carefully, his massive body filling the room with silent force. He should have looked frightening. Instead, he looked at the cloth on the table, then at Emily, as if he had heard every word spoken above him and understood the cost of each one. Do not start, she whispered, pressing a hand to her racing heart. I know it was reckless. He stepped closer. The floor creaked under his weight. Emily expected him to return to the hearth, but instead he lowered his head until his cold nose brushed the back of her trembling hand. The gesture was so gentle, so deliberate, that her breath caught. No one thanked omegas in Frostpine. Not for medicine left on porches. Not for fevers eased in secret. Not for courage disguised as obedience. But this impossible wolf, hunted by royal men and marked by shadows, stood in her poor cabin and thanked her without words. Emily's eyes stung. You are welcome, she said, barely above a whisper. Outside, the village bell began to ring again, faster this time, calling every able wolf to the square. Lord Victor Hale had arrived in Frostpine himself. The bell's urgent rhythm rolled across Frostpine like a warning carried on iron wings. Emily stood in the center of her cabin, one hand still pressed to her heart, listening as the sound struck the frozen air again and again. 3 rings meant assembly. 4 meant danger. This was neither. This was a command, sharp and relentless, summoning every wolf old enough to bow. The great white wolf beside her lifted his head toward the village, silver eyes narrowing with an intelligence that no animal should have carried. The dark lines beneath his fur stirred faintly, not spreading, but waking, like smoke disturbed under glass. Emily saw the change and moved quickly to the window, careful not to part the curtain more than a sliver. Down the road, people were already leaving their homes, cloaks pulled tight, heads bent against the cold. No one ignored a royal summons, especially not one delivered by Lord Victor Hale. Emily had seen him only once before, years ago, when he passed through Frostpine with the king's winter court. She remembered a tall man in black gloves, smiling as if every room belonged to him before he entered it. Not warm. Not cruel in the obvious way Mason Reed was cruel. Lord Hale's danger was smoother, polished until it looked like law. He is gathering everyone, Emily whispered, which means he did not find what he wanted by the creek. The wolf's gaze turned to her. The look was answer enough. He wanted her to stay hidden. She almost laughed at that, but the sound caught in her throat. If I do not go, they will notice. Mason will notice first. At the name, the wolf's ears angled back. Emily should not have found comfort in that reaction. She did anyway. She wrapped a clean scarf around her neck, tucked her hair beneath a wool hood, and glanced at the bandage along his side. You stay here. No heroic decisions. No breaking my door. No terrifying the neighbors. The wolf blinked once, slowly. That means yes, she decided, though her voice shook. Before she could reach the door, he stepped in front of her, not blocking with force, asking. The cabin seemed too quiet around them. Emily laid her hand against the thick fur at his shoulder, and the silver warmth answered under her palm. I know, she said softly. I am scared too. For a moment, the wolf lowered his head until his brow brushed her sleeve. Then he stepped aside. The village square was packed by the time Emily arrived. Nearly 200 wolves stood beneath the watchtower, their breath rising in pale clouds, their eyes fixed on the raised platform near the notice post. Mason Reed stood near the front with his father, wearing importance like a borrowed coat. He spotted Emily at once and smiled, not kindly. She folded herself into the back of the crowd, keeping her head low. Lord Victor Hale stood on the platform in a dark traveling coat trimmed with silver. Beside him were royal searchers, silent and straight-backed. His voice carried easily over the square. Your king is missing. Your realm is vulnerable. And somewhere near this village, a cursed white wolf has been sheltered by a traitor. A ripple of fear passed through the crowd. Emily felt it move through bodies before it reached her, a cold wave of suspicion looking for a place to land. Lord Hale continued, calm as falling snow. This creature is not your king. It is what remains when a curse hollows out a noble bloodline. Anyone protecting it is protecting a danger to every child, every home, every pack under the northern crown. Emily's stomach twisted. The words were beautiful. That made them worse. Beautiful lies traveled faster than ugly ones. Mason lifted his chin. My lord, he called, loud enough for everyone to hear. Some of us saw tracks leading toward the edge cabins. One cabin belongs to a band Omega healer. The crowd shifted. Faces turned. Emily felt them finding her. One by one. She keeps strange hours, Mason added. And she has always liked pretending rules do not apply to her. Heat climbed Emily's throat, but she said nothing. Silence had protected her before. Today it felt like a cage. Lord Hale's eyes settled on her from across the square, pale and assessing. Emily Harper, he said, and the crowd opened around her as if her name were a spark dropped in dry grass. Step forward. Her feet moved because refusing would have been worse. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she crossed the open space. She could feel every stare, every old judgment waking with new purpose. Omega, band healer, edge girl, liar. Lord Hale looked down at her from the platform. Did you see a white wolf last night? Emily's hands trembled inside her sleeves. She thought of silver eyes in the hollow, a cold nose brushing her hand in gratitude, a massive body standing between her and fear even while wounded. Then she heard herself answer, soft but clear. I saw something hurt. A murmur rose. Lord Hale's smile faded by a fraction. That was not my question. Emily lifted her eyes. Not high enough to challenge rank, but high enough to keep her soul intact. Then maybe it was the wrong question. The square went silent. Mason's face hardened. Lord Hale stepped down from the platform, slow and measured, until he stood only a few feet away. Compassion is admirable in its place, he said. But misplaced compassion can become treason. Emily's heartbeat thundered. Still, from somewhere deep inside her, the silver warmth stirred, not bright, not visible, but steady. If kindness is treason, she whispered, then the North has already lost more than its king. For the first time, Lord Victor Hale did not look amused. The silence that followed Emily's words felt larger than the square itself. No one moved. Even the wind seemed to pause between the rooftops, holding its breath above Frost Pine, while Lord Victor Hale studied her with the calm interest of a man deciding whether a candle should be pinched out or allowed to burn a little longer. Emily's knees wanted to shake. She locked them in place. She had spent years surviving by becoming smaller, by swallowing every answer that might make life harder, by letting people mistake gentleness for weakness because correcting them cost too much. But somewhere between the snowy hollow and her cabin floor, something inside her had shifted. Maybe it was the silver light. Maybe it was the wolf's silent gratitude. Maybe it was simply the exhaustion of being asked to apologize for having a heart. Lord Hale turned his gaze to the crowd. "You hear her," he said, his voice smooth again. And Omega admits sympathy for the creature. Mason stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "She is hiding it. I know she is." His eyes glittered with satisfaction as he pointed toward the road. "Search her cabin again. Search it properly this time." A murmur spread through the villagers, nervous and hungry. Suspicion always gave people something to hold when fear made their hands empty. Emily looked from face to face, hoping for one person to remember the fevered children she had helped, the salves left on porches, the animals carried home from storms. Most looked away. That hurt more than Mason's smile. Lord Hale lifted one gloved hand. "Very well." Emily's heart dropped. "All edge cabins will be searched. Miss Harper will accompany us." Mason moved close enough for only her to hear. "You should have stayed invisible." Emily looked at him, really looked at the boy who had grown into a man without growing kinder. "I tried," she said softly. "You kept dragging me into the light." His jaw tightened. The walk back to her cabin felt longer than the half-mile road she knew by memory. Royal searchers surrounded her, their boots breaking the snow into a hard path. Villagers followed at a distance, drawn by the promise of disgrace. Above the trees, gray clouds gathered, dimming the morning until the world looked carved from ash. Emily kept her eyes on the cabin roof as it came into view. The chimney smoked gently. The door was shut. For one wild, desperate second, she hoped the wolf had fled through the back cellar hatch and reached the woods. Then she felt it. A pulse beneath the air, faint and silver, answering her fear. He was still inside. Lord Hale noticed her pause. "Something wrong?" "No." Her voice was steady enough to surprise her. "Then open it." Emily stepped onto the porch. Her hand closed around the latch. Inside, something heavy shifted, then went still. Not fear. Readiness. She wanted to whisper for him to run. She wanted to throw herself in front of the door and become impossible to move. Instead, she opened it and stepped into the room first. The cabin looked almost ordinary. Fire low, herbs hanging, blankets folded. The quilt covering the storage room hung motionless. Lord Hale entered behind her, followed by Mason and two searchers. His gaze traveled slowly, missing nothing. "Charming," he said. "A little shrine to disobedience." Mason went straight to the storage quilt. Emily moved before he reached it. "Do not." He smiled. "Still giving orders?" "No," she said. "A warning." He grabbed the quilt and pulled it aside. The storage room was empty. For half a heartbeat, Emily could not breathe. Then the floorboards behind the hearth creaked. Every head turned. The great white wolf stepped from the shadow near the back wall, larger than memory, pale fur catching the dim firelight, silver eyes fixed not on Mason, not on Lord Hale, but on Emily. The room erupted in startled shouts, but the wolf did not lunge. He crossed the cabin with slow, wounded dignity and placed himself between Emily and every raised hand. Lord Hale's face changed, not with fear, with recognition. "So," he whispered, "the curse still wears his eyes." Mason backed toward the door, suddenly much less brave. Emily stared at the wolf's bandaged side, at the dark lines pulsing harder beneath his fur, and understood the terrible truth. He had hidden once for her. Now he had revealed himself for her. "Please," she whispered, though she did not know whether she was speaking to him or to the room. The wolf's head lowered, and a low sound moved through the floorboards, not threatening, but full of command. Outside, every wolf in the yard went silent. Lord Hale raised his hand again, but before he could speak, the silver light beneath Emily's skin flared brighter than ever, spilling from her palms like moonlight. The wolf turned his head toward her, and for the first time, she heard a voice inside the silence, deep, strained, and unmistakably human. "Emily," it said, "do not be afraid." Emily did not understand how a voice could enter her mind, and still feel like it had been waiting in her heart. It was not loud. It did not push. It arrived like warmth through a locked door, deep and controlled, carrying pain, command, and something gentler beneath both. Do not be afraid. The silver light in her palms brightened until the tiny cabin filled with a soft moonlit glow. Mason stumbled back against the table, knocking over a jar of lavender. One of the royal searchers whispered a prayer. Lord Victor Hale alone remained still, but his eyes had sharpened with a hatred too old to have been born that morning. Do not listen to it, he said. The curse mimics what you want to hear. The wolf's head turned slowly toward him. The air changed. Not violently. Not loudly. It simply grew heavy with the presence of something royal remembering itself. Emily saw it then, not with her eyes, but with the light moving through her hands. A crown-shaped shadow wrapped around the wolf's spirit, dark threads binding a human soul beneath layers of fear and spell work. He was not empty. He was buried. You knew? Emily whispered. Lord Hale's mouth curved, but the smile did not reach his eyes. I knew my nephew was too dangerous to rule once the old blood awakened. The North needed stability. The word stability fell into the room like ice. Emily thought of the decree, the searchers, the frightened village, the careful lie dressed as protection. You told everyone he was a monster. People obey simple stories. The wolf stepped forward, and the black marks beneath his fur flared. Emily felt his pain ripple through the silver bond between them, fierce enough to bring tears to her eyes. He was holding the curse back, holding himself back, because the room was full of people who feared him, because she stood behind him. Emily. The voice came again, strained now. Your light weakens it, but I cannot hold this form much longer. Her breath caught. What do I do? Lord Hale's expression flickered. For the first time, he looked uncertain. The wolf turned his silver eyes to her, and the answer came not as command, but trust. Stay. Such a small word. Such an impossible request. Emily stepped around him before fear could change her mind. Mason whispered her name like a warning, but she did not look at him. She placed both hands against the wolf's chest, where the dark markings gathered thickest beneath white fur. The cold hit her first, a deep winter cold that had nothing to do with weather. Then came sorrow. Years of it. Loneliness behind palace walls. A throne made of duty. A man cursed by blood and hunted by the one who should have protected him. Emily's light answered all of it. It poured from her palms in silver waves, not burning, not breaking, only finding every shadowed place and reminding it that it was not the whole truth. The wolf lowered his head over her shoulder, trembling with the effort to stay still. That is it, she whispered, though her own knees weakened. Stay with me too. The cabin walls seemed to breathe. Frost melted from the windows. The fire flared blue-white for a single heartbeat. Then the curse cracked with a sound like ice splitting across a frozen lake. The wolf's body became light, then smoke, then a storm of silver sparks rising through the room. Emily staggered back, but strong hands caught her before she fell. Not paws. Hands. The glow faded slowly, revealing a man kneeling where the wolf had stood. He was tall, even brought low by exhaustion, broad-shouldered beneath torn winter-dark clothing, pale skin marked by faint silver scars that glimmered and vanished beneath the firelight. His hair was black as a moonless sky, damp against his brow, and his eyes were the same impossible silver that had found her in the forest. Every person in the cabin stopped breathing. The royal searchers dropped to one knee. Outside, through the open door, the villagers followed one by one as recognition moved through them like thunder without sound. Lord Hale went white. Emily stared at the man before her, her heart too full of fear and wonder to make room for anything else. He still held her gently, as though she were the one who had been wounded. His gaze never left her face. King Adrian Blackwood, one searcher whispered, shaking. The man's hand tightened around Emily's just enough to steady her, not claim her, not command her. His voice, when he spoke aloud for the first time, was low, rough, and unmistakably human. You should have let me die, little healer. Emily looked at the kneeling soldiers, the silent villagers, Lord Hale's broken certainty, and finally back at the king she had carried through the snow. I told you, she whispered. I do not know how to walk away from something hurting. The cabin remained silent long after Emily spoke, as if every wall, every window, every breath in frost pine needed time to understand what had just happened. King Adrian Blackwood was alive. Not a rumor. Not a curse wearing a royal face. Alive, kneeling on the worn rug beside Emily Harper's hearth, one hand still holding hers with careful restraint while the entire village watched from the snow outside. For years, Emily had imagined what it would feel like if people finally looked at her. She had thought it might feel like victory. Instead, it felt heavy, almost sorrowful, because the same eyes that had ignored her kindness now widened only because a king had made it impossible to look away. Adrian rose slowly. Even weakened, he seemed to fill the room more completely than the wolf had, tall and broad-shouldered, wrapped in winter-dark silence and the kind of authority that did not need to raise its voice. One royal searcher removed his cloak and offered it with bowed head. Adrian took it, but before placing it over himself, he turned and draped it around Emily's shoulders. The fabric was too large, warm from the soldier's hands, edged with the black and silver crest of the northern crown. A sound moved through the villagers outside, a soft shock of disbelief. Emily's fingers closed around the cloak, unsure whether to hold it or give it back. "Your Majesty," Lord Hale said carefully, recovering his voice. "You are not yourself. The healer has interfered with royal matters she cannot comprehend." Adrian looked at him then. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, though the fire burned steady. "She comprehended enough to show mercy when my own blood ordered fear." Lord Hale's face tightened. "I acted for the safety of the realm." "No," Adrian said. "You acted for the safety of your ambition." He did not shout. He did not need to. The words settled over the room with the finality of a door closing. The searchers turned toward Lord Hale, no longer uncertain about where loyalty belonged. Mason Reed stood half-hidden near the doorway, pale and speechless, all his sharp little cruelties suddenly stripped of their audience. Adrian's gaze moved to him. "You accused her." Mason swallowed. "I thought she was hiding a threat. She was sheltering your king." The square outside went utterly still. Adrian stepped to the open doorway, drawing Emily with him only because she still looked unsteady beneath the royal cloak. Snow drifted down over the waiting villagers, soft and bright against bowed heads. He looked over Frost Pine, over the people who had called her useless, strange, too gentle, too low to matter. When he spoke, his voice carried to the farthest edge of the road. "The Omega you dismissed saved the crown when stronger wolves obeyed a lie." Emily's throat tightened so fiercely she could hardly breathe. No one had ever spoken of her gentleness as strength. No one had ever said saved and meant her. One by one, the villagers lowered their eyes. Not to Adrian this time. To her. Mason's father bowed first, stiff with shame. Then the searchers. Then the healers who had barred her from the infirmary. The motion spread through the crowd until Frost Pine itself seemed to bend beneath the quiet weight of truth. Emily did not smile. She only stood there, hands trembling under the cloak, understanding that recognition could not erase years of loneliness, but it could stop them from defining the rest of her life. Adrian turned back to her, and the command in him softened into something almost private. "Emily Harper," he said, "you owe this village nothing, but the North owes you more than thanks." She looked up at him, at the silver eyes that had first found her through snow and pain. "I did not heal you for reward. I know." His voice lowered. "That is why it mattered." Beneath the cloak, her palms warmed again. The silver light did not flare this time. It pulsed gently, answering something hidden beneath Adrian's ribs. His expression changed, just for a moment, as if he had felt it too. The curse was not gone. Not entirely. It had retreated, wounded and quiet, waiting in the dark places no law could reach. Emily understood before he said anything. Her light had not ended the danger. It had revealed the bond. Adrian leaned closer, careful, respectful, his voice meant only for her. "The curse did not weaken near you, Emily. It recognized you." Snow fell between them and the silent village. Somewhere beyond the pines, the northern road waited, leading toward Blackwood Palace, toward a throne wrapped in shadows, toward a fate far larger than the little cabin at the edge of Frost Pine. Emily looked once at the forest where she had found him bleeding beneath the moon. Then she looked at the king standing beside her, no longer a beast, not yet free, but alive because she had chosen mercy when fear would have been easier. "Then I suppose," she whispered, drawing the cloak tighter around her shoulders, "we find out what it wants." Adrian's gaze softened with a promise he did not speak aloud. And as the first clear beam of sunlight broke through the storm clouds, touching the snow in silver gold, Emily Harper stepped out of the doorway beside the cursed Alpha King, no longer hidden at the edge of the pack, but walking toward the destiny that had finally spoken her name.